On the edge of the galaxy, in a quiet corner of the Galactic Federation, there was an outpost that housed many different species, all working together to maintain peace and explore the stars. Among these species was the Nyxarian race, a delicate group of beings known for their small size and immense intelligence. Trixa, a young Nyxarian biologist, had lived on this outpost for several years, quietly studying the strange and exotic creatures of the galaxy. Although she was brilliant, she had always felt something was missing in her life, a sense of adventure, perhaps, or even companionship. Her species was not known for physical strength or grand achievements. They were thinkers, not warriors. Many Nyxarians had resigned themselves to the idea that they would never truly connect with other species in a meaningful way. After all, how could someone so small ever make a difference in a universe so vast? Trixa's day began like any other. She arrived at her lab early in the morning, where the soft hum of machinery filled the air. Her work was demanding, but it was the only thing that seemed to keep her mind occupied. As she moved about the lab, carefully adjusting equipment, her thoughts often wandered back to her own kind's limitations. The Nyxarians were known for their intellectual prowess, but even their best scientists could not find a way to overcome the fundamental barrier between their species and others. The issue was simple. Biologically speaking, Nyxarians were incompatible with most other species when it came to reproduction. This left Trixa with a sense of longing for something she would never have: the chance to experience parenthood. As she bent over a microscope, deeply absorbed in her research, the door to her lab suddenly slid open with a soft hiss. Trixa jumped, startled, as a tall figure filled the doorway. It was a human. She had heard of humans, of course. Everyone in the Federation had. They were strong, adaptable, and full of energy. Their species had spread across the galaxy in a way no one else had, and they were known for their adventurous spirit. But Trixa had never met one before. Not up close. Humans were often seen as brash and impulsive, traits that the Nyxarians considered unbecoming. The human standing in her doorway was not what she expected. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with short brown hair and a slight stubble on his chin. His uniform was worn, but it looked practical. There was an air of confidence about him, but also a kind of nervousness. Trixa raised an eyebrow. Sorry, didn't mean to intrude," the human said, his voice a little rough but friendly. "The outpost is pretty huge, and I think I took a wrong turn." Trixa blinked, taken aback by his casual tone. She had never encountered anyone who spoke so informally before. Humans, from what she had heard, were known for being direct, but this was beyond her expectations. "You're lost?" Trixa asked, her voice soft, almost cautious. She wasn't used to strangers wandering into her lab uninvited. The human nodded sheepishly. "Yeah, I'm Captain Derek Haynes. I'm here for repairs on my ship. They told me to head to the engineering wing, but, well, I seem to have missed that." Trixa frowned. "This is the biology lab, not engineering." Derek looked around, realizing his mistake. Right. I didn't mean to interrupt your work." He stepped back slightly, but Trixa was curious. She had read about humans, but meeting one face-to-face was different. They were known for their resilience, their willingness to take risks. They were always pushing boundaries. Trixa had heard of their long journeys, their ability to thrive in places where no other species could. The human spirit, they called it. It was something that intrigued her. "I'm Trixa," she said, still standing behind her workstation, unsure of what to do next. "You're not lost anymore, are you?" Derek laughed softly. "No, I think I'm good now. But I'd love to get a tour of this place if you've got time. I've read about the research that goes on here. Seems pretty impressive." Trixa considered this for a moment. She wasn't accustomed to giving tours, but something about Derek's easygoing manner made her reconsider. "I suppose I could show you around. But I warn you, our research is not as exciting as you might think." "Hey, I'm not here for excitement," Derek replied with a wink. I'm just curious. Plus, I bet you know more about the galaxy than most people." That comment caught Trixie off guard. She had always been a little self-conscious about her species' reputation. She wasn't sure why, but Derek's words made her feel seen. She couldn't help but smile, just a little. "Well," she said, setting down the tools she had been holding, "I suppose I could show you the main research areas, but only if you promise to stop getting lost." Derek grinned. "Deal." As Trixie led him through the halls of the outpost, she found herself in an odd new situation. She had always been focused on her work, and even though she enjoyed learning about other species, she had never felt this sense of curiosity towards someone else before. Derek's friendly, carefree attitude was a stark contrast to her quiet, reserved nature. For a brief moment, Trixie allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't as empty as she had always believed. The days that followed seemed to blur together for Trixie and Derek. What had started as an accidental meeting in her lab slowly turned into something else entirely. They spent more time together than either of them had expected, and the chemistry between them grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't that they were the same, or even particularly alike. Trixie was small and quiet, a delicate being who thrived in her studies of biology and genetics. Her species, the Nyxarians, were known for their brilliant minds, but their physical form was not suited for combat or great adventure. Derek, on the other hand, was a human, strong, tall, and filled with an energy that seemed to never run out. He was a captain of his own ship, and the stories he told of his travels through space fascinated her. At first, their conversations had been simple. Derek would ask her questions about her research, and Trixie would give him answers, trying to avoid sounding too eager or too excited. She had always kept her emotions hidden behind a wall of professionalism. It was easier that way. Emotion could cloud judgment, and she had never been one to let her emotions get in the way of science. But as the days passed, Trixie noticed something different about the way Derek listened to her. He didn't just hear her words. He seemed to absorb them, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He was the first person in a long time who truly seemed to understand the value of her work. It wasn't just about collecting data or running experiments. It was about understanding the living beings around her, the vast diversity of life in the galaxy. They began spending more time together outside of the lab as well. Derek would take her on short trips to the outpost's observation deck, where they would watch the stars twinkle in the dark sky. Trixie, who had spent most of her life studying the stars from a distance, was amazed at how much more real and vivid they seemed when viewed in person. Derek's enthusiasm was contagious, and before long, Trixie found herself laughing at his jokes and enjoying the moments they shared. Despite their growing connection, there was something holding Trixie back. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their relationship was destined to fail. After all, Nyxarians and humans were so different. The thought of any deeper connection was impossible, at least in her mind. It wasn't just the physical differences, although that alone was enough to make her question things. The biological barriers between their species were insurmountable. Nyxarians could never have children with humans. It was a simple fact of life. But there was more to it. Trixie had grown up in a world where emotions were to be kept in check. Nyxarians were taught from a young age that their value was in their intellect, not in their ability to form relationships. She had always been content with this. Relationships, she believed, only led to distractions. Yet now, as she spent more time with Derek, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to life than just research and solitude. One afternoon, as they stood together on the observation deck, gazing at the distant stars, Trixie felt a strange pull inside her. Derek was standing close, not too close, but just enough for her to feel his warmth. He was talking about his latest adventure, something involving a dangerous alien planet, and Trixie listened intently, her mind half on his words and half on the strange feeling that had begun to take root in her chest. "Do you ever wonder, Trixie," Derek asked suddenly, his voice quiet, "what it would be like if we weren't so different? If the universe didn't divide us by species, by biology?" Trixie blinked, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to ask such a thing. For a moment, she couldn't find the words to respond. "I've thought about it," she said slowly, her voice soft. "But the truth is, we are different. Our biology isn't compatible. Our species, we can't." Derek didn't seem to be listening to her words as much as he was listening to the way she said them. He smiled, a little sadly. "Maybe not right now," he said, "but that doesn't mean we have to let that stop us from trying, does it?" Trixie felt her heart race in her chest. This was a side of Derek she hadn't seen before, the side that wasn't just about adventure or bravado. This was something deeper, more vulnerable. But she couldn't allow herself to feel the same way, could she? "No, I suppose not," she said, her voice barely a whisper. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the outpost and the distant sounds of ships coming and going. Trixie's mind was a whirlwind. She had never allowed herself to entertain such thoughts before. What Derek was suggesting went against everything she had ever known. And yet, something inside her wanted to believe him. Maybe they could find a way. Maybe they could prove that love didn't have to follow the rules of biology. But the doubts lingered. She was small, too small. She had always thought herself unworthy of anything more than the life she had built around her research. But Derek's presence made her wonder if she was wrong. It was a quiet evening on the outpost when Trixie first realized just how deeply her feelings for Derek had grown. She had been working late in her lab, analyzing data from an experiment on the effects of alien plant life on Nixarian biology. Her mind had been focused on the numbers and research, but in the back of her thoughts, there was Derek, a constant, comforting presence. She had tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept creeping back. Trixie had always prided herself on her logic, on her ability to separate emotion from reason. But Derek was starting to break down the walls she had built around herself. She found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. His laughter, his stories of far-off planets, the way he made her feel like her work mattered beyond the walls of her lab. These were things she hadn't realized she longed for. As the days passed, their interactions became more frequent. Derek would visit her lab almost every day, bringing her a cup of coffee from the common room or simply stopping by to chat. Trixie found herself looking forward to those moments, even though she knew they were only temporary. She was a Nixarian, and she couldn't forget the biological reality that separated them. They were from different species, with different needs, different priorities. There could be no lasting bond between them. But that didn't stop Trixie from feeling conflicted. There was a part of her that wanted to explore what they had together, to take the risk of opening herself up to something new. But there was another part of her, one that was rooted in her culture, in her upbringing, that told her this was dangerous. She had been taught that Nixarians were meant to focus on their intellect, not their emotions. Relationships were distractions, and mixing with other species was even more dangerous. It wasn't just about the risks to their species' purity. It was about the heartache that could follow. One day, as Trixie was finishing her work, her superior, a high-ranking Nixarian named Valor, entered her lab. Valor was a respected scientist, but his view on interspecies relations was rigid. He looked at her with a stern expression, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Trixie," Valor said, his voice low but firm, "I've noticed your recent interactions with the human. Captain Derek Haynes, correct?" Trixie straightened up, her heart skipping a beat. She had always respected Valor, but she had never shared her personal life with him. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Derek and I are just working together. There is nothing unusual about it." Valor's eyes narrowed. "It is not just about work, Trixie. I've seen the way you look at him. You're getting too close, and that is dangerous." Trixie's breath caught in her throat. She had been careful to hide her feelings, to keep them buried deep inside, but it seemed that her behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. Valor continued, "You must understand, Trixie, that the Nixarian race is too fragile to mix with humans. Our biology is incompatible. It could lead to genetic mutations, complications. Do you really think you can ignore that? Trixa felt a wave of frustration rise within her. She had always known the risks, but hearing them from Vaylor's mouth made her feel like a child again. She had always followed the rules, always been the obedient scientist, but something about his words made her feel small and powerless. "I'm aware of the risks," she said quietly. "But Derek is different. We have a connection." Vaylor's expression hardened. "There is no room for such things in our society, Trixa. We must focus on our work, our research, relationships with humans, especially ones as complicated as this, are dangerous." Trixa's heart sank. She had known this would come, but hearing it from someone she respected hurt more than she expected. She felt trapped between the person she had always been, the person who followed logic and reason, and the person she was becoming, the person who wanted more than what her species had allowed her to desire. "I understand," Trixa said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I will keep my distance." But inside, she felt a pang of sadness. She didn't want to let go of the connection she had with Derek, but the pressure from Vaylor, from her own species, was too much to ignore. Later that evening, Derek found her in the hallway outside her lab. He could tell something was wrong. Trixa's shoulders were slumped, and her usually bright eyes seemed clouded with worry. "Trixa, what happened?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. She hesitated before answering. I was just having a conversation with my superior. It's nothing." Derek stepped closer, sensing the tension in her. "I know it's not nothing. What's going on?" Trixa sighed, looking up at him with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "It's just, I can't be close to you. Not like this. My people, they don't allow it. They say it's too dangerous. Our biology, it's too different." Derek frowned, stepping forward. "You don't really believe that, do you?" Trixa shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything I've been taught tells me this is wrong. But when I'm with you, I feel like I could be something more. And I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what this could mean for both of us." Derek reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Trixa, I don't care about our biology. I don't care about the rules. I care about you." Her heart raced as she looked up at him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. She had always been taught that love was a distraction, that it was something that could only lead to disappointment. But in that moment, looking into Derek's eyes, she wondered if there might be more to life than what she had been taught. "I care about you too," she whispered. Trixa couldn't sleep that night. The weight of her conversation with Derek echoed in her mind, each word spinning around like a vortex she couldn't escape. She had always believed in the logic of science, in the undeniable truths of biology and genetics. But in Derek's eyes, she saw something she couldn't explain, a glimmer of hope, a kind of understanding that she had never known existed. It made her feel vulnerable, exposed, and yet, somehow, it was also comforting. She rolled over in her small bed, staring at the ceiling of her quarters. The cool, dim light of the outpost filtered through the small window, casting shadows across the room. The outpost was quiet at night, with only the hum of the energy fields in the walls providing any sound. But Trixa's mind was anything but quiet. It was racing, questioning everything she had always thought to be true. She couldn't deny the connection she felt with Derek. It wasn't just about his strength or his adventurous spirit. It was something deeper, something that reached into her very being. But how could it work? Could they really defy everything they had been taught? The thought of taking that risk terrified her. The next day, she found herself in the lab, absent-mindedly adjusting her research equipment. Her hands moved mechanically, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had to focus, she knew that. The research was important, her work was important, but every time she tried to push the thoughts of Derek away, they came flooding back. She was startled when the door to her lab opened, and Derek walked in, his usual grin on his face. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her, a hint of concern in his eyes. Trixie couldn't help but smile when she saw him. Despite everything, she was glad to see him. She hadn't realized how much she missed him until now. "Busy?" Derek asked, breaking the silence. Trixie nodded, though she was hardly focused on her work. "Just reviewing some data." Derek stepped closer, leaning against the edge of the table where she was working. "You've been distant lately. Everything okay?" Trixie paused, setting down her tools. She had been trying so hard to keep her emotions in check, to avoid letting her feelings for him interfere with her work. But it was getting harder. She knew that if she didn't talk to him, the tension between them would only grow. "I've been thinking about what we talked about," Trixie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek's expression softened. "I'm not going to push you, Trixie, but I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. If you're scared, I get it, but we'll figure it out together." Her heart fluttered at his words, but a part of her still hesitated. "I don't know if we can," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've spent my whole life being taught that mixing with other species is wrong, that it's dangerous." Derek nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know. I've heard the stories too. But you know what? I don't believe we have to follow every rule. Maybe it's time to make our own. We're not just our biology, Trixie. We're more than that. We have hearts. We have minds. We can make our own choices." Trixie's breath caught in her throat. She had always prided herself on her intellect, her ability to understand the world through science and reason. But Derek's words struck a chord deep inside her. He was right, in a way. She didn't have to follow every rule that had been set for her. She could choose her own path, and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to walk it with him. "I've been so afraid," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, "afraid that if we tried, it would just end in disaster. That we would end up hurting each other." Derek reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "I won't hurt you, Trixie. And I won't let anyone else hurt you either. We'll figure this out, together." For a moment, they just stood there, their hands touching, the weight of the words they had shared settling between them. Trixie felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't that all of her fears had disappeared, but there was something in Derek's touch, in his words, that made her believe that maybe they could find a way. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course I do," Derek replied with a smile. "You're not alone in this." Trixie took a deep breath and nodded. The decision wasn't easy, but in that moment, she knew that she had to take the chance. She had to stop letting fear control her. She had to trust Derek, and for the first time, trust herself. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's try." Derek's grin grew wider, and he gently squeezed her hand. "I'm with you, Trixie, every step of the way." As the days went on, they spent more time together. They worked side by side, with Trixie teaching Derek about Nixarian biology and Derek sharing his experiences in the vastness of space. There were moments of quiet, but there was also a sense of excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. It wasn't easy. There were still doubts, still fears lingering in the back of Trixie's mind, but with every moment she spent with Derek, she felt those doubts begin to fade. She couldn't deny the bond that was growing between them, a bond that went beyond their biology, beyond their differences. And so, as they moved forward, hand in hand, Trixie couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, the universe had more in store for her than she had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Trixie felt like she was living in a world she hadn't expected to find herself in. She had always been focused on her research, her work, her role in the Nixarian community. But now there was something else in her life. Something more complicated, yet more beautiful. Derek. The more time they spent together, the more she realized how much she was learning, not just about him, but about herself. She had spent so long shutting off her emotions, keeping her distance from others, focusing on her science, But Derek made her feel seen in a way no one else had ever made her feel. It wasn't just the connection between them, though that was powerful. It was the way he respected her intellect, the way he listened when she talked, the way he made her feel like she mattered. However, there was still a lingering uncertainty in the back of her mind. It wasn't just about the risks to their biology anymore. It wasn't just about what others might think. It was about her own fears, the fear of opening up completely, of letting someone else in. She had learned to rely on herself for so long. Could she really let go of that control? One evening, after a long day of research, Trixie found herself once again standing by the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space always amazed her, but tonight it felt different. The stars seemed to shimmer with possibilities, possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her. Do you ever wonder what's out there? Derek's voice broke into her thoughts. She hadn't heard him approach, but she wasn't surprised. He was always nearby, always ready to offer his quiet support. Trixie turned to face him. All the time. There's so much we still don't know, so much to discover. Her voice trailed off, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them. Derek took a step closer, his eyes warm in understanding. What if what we're discovering right here, right now, is us? What if this is the most important discovery of all? Trixie smiled softly, her heart skipping a beat at his words. She could feel his sincerity, the honesty in the way he looked at her. But even so, the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I've spent so long keeping my distance, focusing only on what I can control. And now I'm not sure what to do. Derek placed a hand on her shoulder gently, offering a sense of calm in the chaos of her thoughts. You don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to know everything right away. I'm here, Trixie. I'll wait for you, whenever you're ready. Her heart fluttered at his words. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't demanding anything from her. He was simply there, ready to support her when she was ready to take that next step. It was a kindness she hadn't known she needed, and it made her want to believe in the possibility of something more. I've never had someone like you in my life, Trixie said, her voice soft but sincere. I've never trusted anyone like I trust you, but it scares me. What if I let you in, and it doesn't work? Derek's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his presence reassuring. You can trust me, Trixie, and if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out together. But I don't think it's going to be like that. We've been through too much already. I think we're stronger than we realize. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in his words. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat back into the safety of her solitude. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly awakening since they met, wanted to take a leap of faith, to trust in what they had and see where it could go. I don't know what the future holds, she said finally, her voice steady. But maybe it's worth finding out. Together. Derek's face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. That's all I needed to hear. In the following days, Trixie found herself becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of being with Derek. They continued their research, side by side, but there was something different now. The air between them was filled with an unspoken promise, a promise that they would face whatever challenges came their way together. But not everyone on the outpost shared their optimism. Valor, the Nixarian superior who had warned her about the dangers of her relationship with Derek, approached her again. This time, there was no attempt at subtlety. His face was hard, his tone even sharper than before. Trixie, he said, his voice cold, I see you've made your choice. You've chosen to ignore the warnings. But know this, your actions are not without consequences. You are risking everything. Your work, your reputation, and the future of your people. Trixie took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. I understand the risks, Valor, but I'm not going to live in fear anymore. I have to make my own choices. Valor's eyes narrowed. Then you are choosing a dangerous path. If you continue this, There will be no turning back. You'll be an outcast, no longer part of the Nyxarian community. Trix's heart pounded in her chest. The pressure was mounting, but she refused to let it break her. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice firm. "I'll face whatever comes. I won't let anyone dictate my life." Vaylor's lips curled into a thin smile, but it wasn't one of approval. "Then you are prepared for the consequences." Trixa didn't respond. She turned away, walking back toward the lab. She knew there was no easy way out of this, no way to make everyone happy. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a choice that was truly her own. And with Derek by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future held. Trixa woke up to another quiet morning on the outpost. The stars outside her window were still bright, their distant light casting long shadows across her room. She sat up slowly, her mind racing with thoughts of everything that had happened in the past few weeks. Derek, Vaylor, her own fears. She had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this was different. Her relationship with Derek had opened up new emotions in her, things she had never allowed herself to feel before. Trust, love, hope. It was both exciting and terrifying. After her conversation with Vaylor, Trixa knew that things were about to get even harder. The pressure from her people, the expectations placed on her, those were heavy burdens to carry. But in the end, it was her own decision to make. She had chosen to follow her heart, to trust Derek, despite the risks. Now she had to stand by that choice, no matter what. She got dressed quickly, heading to the lab to meet Derek. The outpost was quiet as always, the hum of machinery filling the air. She passed by familiar faces as she walked, some of them offering her polite nods. But she could sense the whispers that followed her. People were talking. People were noticing. And some of them didn't approve. When she arrived at the lab, Derek was already there, leaning against one of the workstations, waiting for her. His smile was warm, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "Morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" Trixa took a deep breath and smiled back at him. "I'm okay. Just thinking about everything." "It's hard, Derek. The pressure is getting stronger." He stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her arm. "I know. It's not going to be easy. But we've already made it this far, right?" Trixa nodded, grateful for his steady presence. "Right. And I'm not going to back down now. We'll face whatever comes together." Derek gave her a reassuring squeeze on the arm. "Exactly. We'll figure it out. Together." For a moment, they stood in silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. But the moment didn't last long. The door to the lab slid open, and Vaylor stepped inside, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto Trixa. "Trixa," he said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." Trixa's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming. She had expected it, but that didn't make it any easier. Derek glanced between the two of them, his expression hardening as he stepped back, giving them space. "I'm listening," Trixa said, trying to keep her voice steady. Vaylor didn't waste any time. "Your actions have consequences, Trixa. I gave you a warning, but it seems you've chosen to ignore it. You've gone too far this time. Your relationship with the human is not just a personal matter. It is a matter of our species' future. If you continue down this path, you will no longer be welcome in the Nyxarian community." Trixa's chest tightened. The weight of his words felt heavy, but she refused to show weakness. "I've made my choice, Vaylor, and I stand by it. I won't let anyone control my life." Vaylor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't raise his voice. "You're risking everything, Trixa. Your reputation, your career, and everything we've worked for. Is it really worth it?" Trixa didn't flinch. She had prepared herself for this. "Yes, it is. I'm willing to risk it all. Because what I found with Derek, it's worth more than anything else." For a long moment, Vaylor said nothing. The tension in the room was thick, and Derek stood quietly in the background, not saying a word. He was there for her, but he understood this was her battle to fight. Finally, Valor spoke again, his voice quieter, but no less firm. "You're making a mistake, Trixa. I hope you realize that." With that, he turned and walked out of the lab, leaving Trixa and Derek standing together, their hearts heavy with the weight of the conversation. Trixa didn't speak right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She knew what she had to do, but the road ahead would not be easy. Derek walked over to her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Trixa. Don't let him make you doubt yourself." Trixa looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "It's hard, Derek. I've spent my whole life following the rules, doing what I was told. And now I'm breaking them. I don't know what's going to happen." "You're stronger than you think," Derek said softly. "You've already made it this far. And I'll be here, no matter what happens. You don't have to go through this alone." Trixa smiled faintly, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and gratitude. She had never imagined that her life would take such a turn, that she would find someone like Derek, someone who believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. "I'm not alone, am I?" she said quietly, her voice tinged with a touch of hope. "No," Derek replied with a smile. "You're never alone." As the days passed, the pressure from the Nixarian community only grew. Whispers followed Trixa wherever she went, and she could feel the eyes of her peers on her. Some of them looked at her with disapproval, others with pity. But there were a few, only a few, who offered their silent support. It was a small thing, but it meant more to her than they could ever know. Through it all, Derek remained by her side. They spent long hours in the lab, working together, supporting each other. And as the weeks went by, Trixa began to feel more certain in her decision. She knew that what she was doing was right for her. It wasn't easy, and it might never be easy, but she wasn't going to let anyone take away the one thing that had brought her true happiness. Her love for Derek wasn't just a rebellion against the rules. It was a declaration of her right to choose her own path, to carve her own future. And with Derek at her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days following her confrontation with Valor were some of the hardest Trixa had ever faced. Everywhere she went, there was a quiet, suffocating tension. The whispers continued, and she could feel the weight of judgment from her people pressing down on her. Yet, through it all, she held her head high. She had made her choice, and no one, not even Valor, could take that from her. Derek remained her constant source of strength. He was always there, his unwavering support a comfort in the storm of uncertainty that surrounded them. No matter how much the outside world seemed to be against her, Derek made her feel like she could face anything. One evening, after another long day in the lab, Trixa and Derek walked together through the quiet halls of the outpost. It was late, and most of the others had already gone to bed. The only sound was the soft hum of the outpost's power systems. "How are you holding up?" Derek asked, his voice gentle. Trixa sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm not sure. It feels like everything is changing so fast. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Derek. The pressure is overwhelming." Derek paused and turned to face her. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm with you, every step of the way." Trixa looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. His words brought her a sense of peace, even if just for a moment. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, but Derek had shown her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm so grateful for that. But sometimes it feels like the whole universe is against us." Derek smiled gently, his thumb brushing across her hand. "The universe is a big place, Trixa, and sometimes it can feel like the odds are stacked against us. But I believe in you. I believe in us." Trixa felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It was easy to get lost in the negativity, to let fear take over. But Derek had a way of grounding her, reminding her that she didn't have to be afraid to stand up for what she believed in. As they continued walking, they reached the observation deck. The stars stretched out before them, a vast sea of lights in the infinite blackness of space. Trixie had always loved the stars, the way they seemed to offer endless possibilities. But now, they seemed to symbolize something more, something she hadn't fully understood until now. "We've made it this far," Trixie said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm not going to let anyone take this from me. Not anymore." Derek stood beside her, his eyes focused on the stars. "You're stronger than you think. We both are. And no matter what comes next, we'll face it together." Trixie smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. It wasn't just about love or biology. It was about trust. It was about choosing each other, even when the world seemed to want to tear them apart. But that night, Trixie didn't sleep. Her mind kept returning to Vaylor's words, to the pressure that still loomed over her. The idea of losing everything she had worked for, her career, her place in Nyxarian society, was terrifying. But it was more terrifying to imagine living a life where she couldn't be true to herself, where she couldn't be with Derek. By morning, Trixie knew what she had to do. She stood before the council, her heart pounding in her chest. Vaylor was there, as were several other Nyxarian leaders, their eyes sharp and judgmental. The weight of their gaze felt unbearable, but Trixie stood tall. She had made her choice, and she would not let fear stand in her way. "Council members," Trixie began, her voice steady, "I stand before you today to make a decision that may cost me everything. But it is a decision I make for myself, for my future, for my happiness." Vaylor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. The room was silent, waiting for her to speak. "I will not be controlled by fear. I will not live in the shadows of expectations or rules that do not serve me. I have chosen to be with Derek, and I will not be ashamed of that choice. I am Nyxarian, yes, but I am also more than that. I am a person, and I choose my own path." The silence in the room was deafening. Trixie could feel the eyes of the council on her, their judgment hanging heavy in the air, but she refused to back down. "I understand the risks," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I understand that my actions may have consequences, but I am willing to face those consequences because I believe that the life I am choosing is worth living. I believe in the power of trust, love, and choice, and I believe that we, as individuals, should have the right to shape our own futures." When she finished speaking, there was a long pause. The tension in the room seemed to stretch out, but slowly, one by one, the council members began to nod. Some of them still looked uncertain, but there was a shift in the air. Trixie had made her stand. Vaylor's voice broke the silence. "You have made your choice, Trixie, and while I do not agree with it, I cannot deny your conviction. But know this, there will be consequences." Trixie met his gaze, her chin lifted with quiet determination. "I am prepared for whatever comes. I will not back down." With that, the council session ended. Trixie stepped out of the room, her heart still racing, but a sense of peace beginning to settle over her. She had stood up for herself. She had chosen her own path. Derek was waiting for her outside the council room. The look on his face told her everything she needed to know. "You did it," he said softly. Trixie smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "We did it." And together, they walked forward into the future, hand in hand. The road ahead was uncertain, and the challenges would not be easy. But for the first time in her life, Trixie felt truly free. She had made her choice, and with Derek by her side, she was ready to face whatever the universe had in store.